Welcome back to Module 5. Then objectives. Here we've worked our way through the agenda down to where you see Module 5. And after this, we'll have a breakout session. And you'll actually play with the Milestones of Adjustment Treatment Guide. So, I want to talk now about implications for the treatment team in the system. This is pretty serious. So we're going to start by looking at factors that contribute to each of the phases. So the first one that contributes to cognitive dissonance, or being on the couch, is the extended duration of untreated psychosis. Lack of access to specialized first episode programs. You've all seen clients that you wish you'd been able to get into the new programs that Washington State has developed. If there's a predominance of negative symptoms, so if we think about those slides that we saw in the previous session and all the different variations on problems with the brain, we know that those with negative symptoms have more problems with the frontal lobe, which is going to make it harder to focus and concentrate and move forward. And those who don't respond to medications, they're going to have a much longer time and maybe never get out of cognitive dissonance. Same thing with substance abuse. We know that can take a tremendous toll on brain function, as well as can negative attitudes of the staff, particularly those on an acute care staff, which will contribute to a negative first episode experience. And if there's lack of patience with the staff. Of course, this goes all the way through. So if you know you're having kind of a bad day at home, maybe you need a mental health day at work. So what are the consequences of an extended time in cognitive dissonance on the couch? Well, this is what contributes to chronicity. And obviously it affects the person's ability to achieve their overall life goals. And perhaps it's going to make that the treatment team is just not realistic. Like I said, trying to move this person towards independent living when they're still trying to deal with frustration and not wanting to go out in public, which then contributes to increased fear and anxiety, and then there's going to be disrupted interactions between you and the consumers. Okay, what are factors that actually affect the ability to develop insight then? Well, this is where we pull in societal stigma and the negative impact of that. It's really hard to go up to the bus depot phase when you're just really so afraid that people are going to pick on you, make fun of you, laugh at you, much of what they've experienced earlier. Or if there's a negative family response to psychosis, that is going to contribute to lack of wanting to move forward and try to understand this illness. Or there's unexpected, unrealistic expectations for recovery. In other words, if the treatment team is pushing them too fast, that's going to make it hard. And what does it mean to them? What's the personal impact of a psychotic episode? Maybe there's psychosis in the family, and this person goes, I do not want to be like my mom or my dad or my uncle or my brother. So it's really important to know, what does it mean to have a psychotic episode for anybody? And if there's the presence of anosognosia, as we talked on our brain day, looking at the person who does not actually has no awareness that there's anything wrong. We know those folks have a very difficult time with insight. And we certainly know that the great book, I'm Not Sick, There's Nothing Wrong with Me, by Dr. Javier Amador, that's really helpful for people with anosognosia. Now, along with that, we need to determine what's anosognosia and what's failure of illness cognition. So initially people just might be so confused, so disorganized, that it's failure of illness cognition as opposed to total lack of awareness that anything's wrong. So generally, after the person's recovered a little bit, maybe they're 4 to 6 weeks into it, that's going to give you a window if they're starting to maybe ask some questions, what's going on, and you probably don't have anosognosia going on then. So what are factors that can affect the ability to develop insights? Well, we know we have a paucity, just not very many reliable cognitive assessment tools or interviews that are designed for schizophrenia. There is a research tool, but it's not that helpful for individual daily interactions to measure cognitive assessment. So what happens is that prevents individualized treatment because we don't really know how bad are the cognitive deficits. Are they going to be enduring? It's really helpful if you can get neuropsych testing, but we know that's not very readily available. So what are consequences of not getting insight? Well, if there is anosognosia on board, then that can impair, delay, or prevent completely attainment of insight, resulting in chronicity and crisis, relapse, rehospitalization. And lack of attention to the cognitive deficits impairs the ability to maintain or develop a therapeutic relationship. Obviously, then also disrupts family relationships. So, boy, when someone doesn't recognize there's a problem, we all know how difficult it is. The person's not going to be reliable with medications, not going to show up for appointments. So what are some of the consequences then? Well, they don't master that skill of autonomous reality checks, like we saw participant 3 so eloquently described for us. And there becomes increased direct and indirect care costs of treatment. So it just makes it more expensive to treat. We've got housing to deal with, relapse to deal with, in and out of the ER, lots of 911 calls, so lots of cost. Potential for homelessness, and increased frustration then of the person, the family, and the staff. What are factors that affect phase 3, cognitive constancy, or going to the mall? Well, we need to have a change in attitudes and beliefs that are based on the ability to accurately perceive reality. So if this is impaired, if they're not really moving out of the bus depot into the mall, it's going to affect things. If there's a presence of ongoing, unconditional support by family and providers, that's going to help. If there's not, then again, this person's going to be stuck. And the ability to have encouragement and reassurance in order for this person to trust their own ability to reality check. And also to increase their willingness to accurately understand behaviors that are induced by the psychosis. So these are 3 big things that we need to be able to see and help our clients with. The ability to change attitudes and beliefs, okay, because they now can perceive reality accurately, the need for support, and the need for encouragement. What are some other factors? There needs to be a sense of safety in housing and treatment to develop self-confidence, self-esteem, and courage. There needs to be competent, empathetic providers who instill trust by informing the person what's happening, and need psychoeducation, all aspects of symptoms, medications, diagnosis, and treatment. And we need to have observable and measurable skills that are characteristics, these milestones that are incorporated into the treatment plan. So what happens if we don't get cognitive constancy? Confusion, because the person doesn't understand what's happening. Escalating fear, caused by symptoms that intensify, because oftentimes they're left alone, they're put in individual housing too soon. Development of poor attitudes and negative self-beliefs. And fear of both success and failure. It's really very difficult when a person can't move into the mall phase. So the last phase, factors that promote ordinariness. Okay? Really carefully considering what were the pre-psychosis life goals, and are those still reasonable? Encourage to re-engage with those if they are reasonable. Maybe have to do some reformulation. And the ability to acquire age-appropriate skills. So in other words, this person has caught up with their maturational lag, and that there's accurate evaluation and therapy for cognitive deficits. It's so important for people to have psychotherapy in helping reclaim themselves or recover themselves. And identify readiness to resume education vocational training. Most places do a fairly good job of that, as long as it's timed in the right timing, not too early in this recovery process. And in the availability, remember the days of good old supported education and vocational support and job coaches? I remember those days. I hope they'll come back someday. That's where our peer support are really helpful. So what happens if a person doesn't, meet ordinariness, or it's really super delayed? They're going to relapse. They're not going to have as successful symptom management. Probably going to be unemployed, and probably have difficulty with future orientation and unachieved life goals. And, I think about the young man that I described to you that went back to WSU. He wanted to get a master's degree in biology. And I encouraged him to think about that. And he wanted to be a biologist. But what happened was he couldn't handle that pressure. So his next choice was wanting to be in nature. So he was actually able to get a job with the Forest Service, which was really, really good for him. And folks will have difficulty maintaining independent living if they can't achieve ordinariness, and social skills will be impaired. And maybe for some, they just won't even be able to complete those ADLs satisfactorily or consistently. Lack of consistency is a problem. Okay, so what about suggestions for your agencies? Suggestions for this system? Let's think about some policy and program design aspects. Okay, I'd like to recommend that we reframe recovery as a process, not an outcome. Because unrealistic expectations to re-engage with previous life activities may be prematurely placed on this person. So, okay, let's push you into school. Let's push this employment. We don't want to push. We want to encourage, which is a little different than getting pushed. And policymakers need to be aware of the length of the process of the whole map, and that there's potential for arrest and progression through the phases at any point. Because if not, they're going to shorten these programs, they're going to put undue pressure on the staff, which ultimately translates to undue pressure on the consumer. We need to pay particular attention to that phase of getting used to it and how the person can accurately determine reality. Have they figured out reality checks? And the thought behind that, not just, oh, I know this isn't reality, but really processing what reality is like. And there needs to be aggressive treatment in the early phase, as we know. It just should be mandatory. I wish we could get first episode programs everywhere, every state, for every person. It would save so much money in the long run and so much anguish. So we need to help policymakers, residential treatment places, to recognize that an extended length of time in cognitive dissonance or the inability to achieve insight could promote tolerance by these programs, especially the ones that are prematurely discharging our folks, or because they're no-shows, or because somebody went to the hospital, they lose their apartment. So we really need to help people understand what this illness is, not what they think it is, but what we know it to be. And be able to articulate the cost by assigning financial burden to each of these phases could then help redirect agency budgets in a manner that's specifically tailored to these individual phases. And again, I want to reiterate, these phases are not linear, and they cross over on each other. Social service agencies that are involved in housing who become aware of the map may then be more tolerant of the problems for folks with schizophrenia, which we know there's so many complaints oftentimes by these residential treatment, the owners of the homes, or low-income housing. So they just don't understand the illness. They understand what they think it is, but they don't understand the illness. And this is where person-centered planning could really utilize the results of this whole study and the work I've been doing over the last several years to change the predicted time frame of interventions. Like doing CBT at the right time, starting in the mall phase, not too much earlier, for example. The treatment centers and programs must engage the family in all aspects of treatment to facilitate movement through the map. Family is critical, and I get it. I know that some people are so burned out. But if we can re-engage those families and help them understand that there really is a process here, this isn't going to necessarily go on forever unless that person is very seriously ill. I know from the folks that were in my study, and when I went down and I met with everybody at the end, and we had our big pizza party, and family was there, the participants were so excited to say, hey, I've met certain milestones, and I've got these to go on, and I need you to help me with them. And the family felt like, whoa, finally there's something tangible that we can use to help measure progress. But the family needs support and respite in order to be able to provide the enduring, lifelong support. So I'm working with a man now. He's 51, and he was 24 when I started working with him and his family. And his parents are quite older now, and really worried about what's going to happen if they would die. And so we're going to have a family session coming up. And here's this family, well into their 80s, still managing their adult son. I mean, he has his own place to live, not in the same town by any means, though, because the family moved when they got into retirement. So, you know, it's so critical to engage with the family and stay engaged. So I'm going to end the formal part before we get into Module 6, which is our actual workshop, by this quote from the President's New Freedom Commission. And this was written in 2003. We envision a future when everyone with mental illness will recover, a future when mental illnesses can be prevented or cured, a future when mental illnesses are detected early, and a future when anyone with a mental illness at any stage of life has access to effective treatment and supports, essentials for living, working, learning, and participating fully in the community. And with that, I thank you for hanging in there with these modules. Hope they're useful for you, that you'll be able to engage in dialogue with your colleagues, with your clients, with their families. And I ask you to just enjoy working with the map and helping people meet milestones and knowing that you are really affecting their futures for the positive. So thank you.